We're starting the recording a little bit late, so people who missed, I have to look at the sources after the fact. But what we learn here is, in fact, that there was a way in which, in our own history, there was a description, rather vivid description, of the way in which a throne for Hashem was built. This in front of you here, is the parallel source to what many of us have been studying. Many of us on this call have been studying every Thursday morning for quite some time. We're learning the book of Malachim, Sefer Malachim Aleph, the book of Kings, the first one. The first part of it. We're learning about Shlomo HaMelech, about the building of the Beit HaMikdash, the building of a place for Hashem, Yerushalayim, etc. And here, as we've been moving our way through it, we have been learning also that parallel source exists in Divrei Hayamim. The book of Chronicles tells the story from another perspective. So we have here at the sunset moment, really, of David HaMelech's life, the celebration as Shlomo HaMelech is being made into the king. He's being inaugurated, essentially. It's a longer story than we have time for right now, but let's say there are many brachot that David HaMelech recites. One of them we say every single day. It's in the Siddur, Vayivarach David et Hashem le'nei kol ha'kahal, Vayomer David. That's every day in our Psukei de Zimra. That's the section I didn't give you. It's right before this one. And here, David asks everyone to bless Hashem. They all bow to Hashem, and they also bow to the king, the new king, etc. They offer many offerings and many libations, and then they have a feast, a Sudat Mitzvah. Vayochlu vayishtu lifnei Hashem bayomahu b'simcha gedola. It's a great simcha. Vayamlichu shenit lishlomo ben David. Why was it a second time? That's not on time for tonight, but suffice to say, David anoints Shlomo. Shlomo is anointed twice in David's life. Vayimshechu Hashem Linagid uletzadok kohen, and they make him basically the regnant, and at the same time Tzadok becomes the kohen. Pasuk Chav Gimel, Vayeshiv Shlomo al kisei Hashem. Shlomo dwelt upon the throne of God, the throne of Hashem. He became the king in the stead of his father, and he had success. Vayatzlach, Vayishmu elav kol Yisrael. The Jewish people hearkened to what he had to say. And he goes on to describe the way in which he was aggrandized. He was given many accolades, much support, and the fact that Hashem made him very, very high in the eyes of the Jewish people. We know, of course, that essentially the zenith of Jewish influence in the world transpires in the time of Shlomo HaMelech. There is a throne. It's actually referred to somewhat quizzically as he sits on the throne of Hashem. Now, he's actually sitting on a throne, obviously, in Yerushalayim. But the point is that there is a representation. This is sort of the Chizkuni's the idea that it's somehow connected to Yerushalayim. There is a throne, and who but Shlomo, whose name bespeaks not just peace, but wholeness and completion, to sit upon it. Then Shlomo sat on the throne of the Lord. Again, JPS as king, instead of David his father, and prosper, and all of Israel hearkened to him. Shlomo HaMelech sat on a throne that is described to us in the book of Kings. What it looked like. It was made of ivory. It was overlaid with very fine gold. It had 6 steps going up to it. It had a rounded top on the chair itself to the back. It had various arms on it, and it had lions. There were lions that were standing on the sides next to the armrests. And then there were 12 lions that are standing there on the 6 steps on each side. This was not done in any other kingdom. So in other words, it was one of the wonders of the world. I don't have a photograph, obviously, but I do have a wonderful sefer at home put together by Harav Menachem Makover. If you ever go in Yerushalayim to the Temple Institute with the Machon HaMikdash, where they're making all of the kelim, they're getting ready for Bayit Shlishi Abba Leinu Latova. So they put out a beautiful sefer on Bayit Rishon. And this is the artist's rendering of the throne of Shlomo HaMelech. So the artist here has given us based on various midrashim, sort of a view of what it is. This is the throne itself, obviously, with the 2 lions. Each of these is deeply symbolic. Here's the seats behind for the Sanhedrin, presumably. They're going to sit there and be with him. Here are the steps going up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And in this artist rendering, based on various midrashim, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 staircases and lions. And you see here various eagles that are on the sides. In some versions, there's a dove. hanging over the top of the throne, and it has a crown in its either, I think, in its mouth that it's holding onto. A whole story, and the king sits underneath it, so he doesn't actually have the crown on his head. It's just hovering above him. The different midrashim. Again, it's not on the pshat. The pshat is what we see here. There were lions. There was a chair, and Shlomo Melech sits on it. It's considered the throne of Hashem in some way. Why? Well, obvious. Shlomo HaMelech represents the kingship of the Jewish kingdom of the Jewish people, but also he equally is, like his father before him, meant to be the servant king. As David HaMelech himself says, Ana Avda the Kudish, Ani Avdecha ben Amatecha, I'm your servant, the son of your maidservant. That's how Shlomo HaMelech considers himself as well. So the Kisei Hashem does have a place. It's actually something we're meant to build. Yes, of course, there's imagery in Sefer Yeshaya and elsewhere about the throne of God, Hashemayim Kisi v'haaretz Hadom Raglai, the heavens are my throne and the earth is my footstool, to be sure. But there's something here about building, actually on planet Earth, a throne, which is a platform for the emissaries of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Atem Eidai, as the Navi describes it, Navi Yeshaya, an expression that is very beautiful and very telling, but unfortunately was stolen from us and appropriated by another faith community, which is makes it problematic for us. But Atem Eidai means you are my witnesses. Klal Yisrael are the witnesses of Hashem in the world. That's what it means to be Mamlechet Kohanim v'Goy Kadosh, the nation of priests, a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. So when we keep going, we see that actually the 6 steps had deep symbolism. The Midrashim try to understand what is this symbolism. So we don't have time to read them all inside, but various suggestions are these 6 particular lands that Shlomo controlled. They're being represented by the 6 steps that lead up to his throne. Perhaps they're the 6 orders of Mishnah. Maybe they're the 6 days of creation. This is a very interesting one, which requires its own shiur. The 6 mothers of the Jewish people. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, Zilpah. Rav Huna says, you know what these 6 steps are? They're the 6 mitzvahs that a king needs to remember and that a king is commanded about. As he walks up each of the steps, a herald calls out one of the mitzvahs. So every time he goes to work, as he goes up each of the steps, he's reminded of each of the mitzvot that he is beholden to, specifically as a king and as a judge, not to pervert justice, and then all of these different halachot that we know about the king that we've been talking about a lot in our Malachim Aleph Shiur. Not to have too many horses means not too many tanks, too many armaments, too much of a military, not to have too much gold and silver, not to be too rapacious in dealings with others in terms of trying to amass wealth for its own sake, not to have too many wives, lest they steer him away from his commitments to his work, and specifically wives, as we will see, those of us in the Thursday morning class, which I'm shamelessly promoting this evening, is all about the idolatrous culture that so many of those wives imported to Yerushalayim. That his influence on others ends up being a 2-way street. They influence him and the Jewish people as well. So there's something there. And then, of course, the idea that he needs to have his own Sefer Torah and to learn from it, etc. When he gets up to after the 6 steps, to the 7th rung, the 7th level, that's what he gets to. When he gets to that, so the herald tells him, Da lifnei mi ata yoshev, know before whom you sit, lifnei mi she'amar v'haya ha'olam. As powerful as you might be, Shlomo, just recognize you are beholden to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and you're sitting, but you're sitting before Hashem and responsible to Hashem. At the top of this also, there's a description that maybe these are the 6 levels of heaven, but aren't there 7? So they say, well, the 7th is where he's sitting, but he's not really getting to the 7th level. That's just for Hashem. Again, deep symbolism. But the point is, when you looked at these 6 steps, you had different ideas to think about. And according to Rav Huna, was actually going through, not just describing the divine chariot, if you will. You have there Roshaya Rabbah at the top, but also Rav Huna, mitzvah. So it must have been laborious for him to get to work, because every time he has to come in, they remind him, sire, another mitzvah, right? So he keeps going up the steps. The Gemara describes that actually making a king happen in Israel is of paramount importance. There are 3 mitzvahs the Jewish people have when we go into the land of Israel. Number 1 is to make sure that we have a king. Number 2 is to destroy Amalek, which means to have a reckoning with evil, which means not to pretend evil doesn't exist, or to shirk it, or shy away from it, or ignore it, but to confront it. And to borrow the expression, by opposing, end it. And then thirdly, to build the Beit HaBechira, to build the Beit HaMikdash. But the Gemara itself says, we don't know which comes first. Which of these three mitzvahs are you supposed to do? So if you look with me on line 3 of this Gemara in Hebrew, Shehu Omer, when it says, and we know this verse now pretty well from earlier in the Shiur, Ki yad al keiska milchama l'Hashem b'Amalek, for the hand is upon the throne of Hashem. There's a war by Hashem against Amalek. Hevei Omer, then say, Lahamid lahem melech tchila, that the first thing you need to do is to have a king. There needs to be an actual throne. In other words, the Gemara expresses ve'ein kisei el melech, and for sure the throne being referenced here is not the supernal celestial throne in Shemayim, the imagery of God's throne, but the building of a throne in Yerushalayim that should be a melech. El melech shenemar vayeshiv Shlomo al kisei Hashem lemelech, the pasuk we just read a few minutes ago from Sefer Divrei Hayamim. So what should you do first? Build the house or destroy Amalek first? Which one comes first? So it quotes various psukim in order to show that there is a particular logic to the order in question. I won't read the rest of the Gemara tonight, but essentially that we see the model is that from Shaul to David, that's the prosecution of wars against Amalek. And once that was laid low, Shlomo HaMelech arrives on the scene, and Hashem tells him, okay, you can build the house. The psukim, as they appear, just a good way to remember it, I wrote 3M here, because it's the 3 mems, really, Melech, Mikdash, and Mechia, 3 things the king needs to do. First of all, they need to make a king. When you come into the land, right? So you'll place a king upon yourself. That's one mitzvah. Another mitzvah is to build the Mikdash, right? And the third one is the destruction of Amalek. If you notice, both Mechiat Amalek, when God will allow you to have a certain reprieve from or relief from all of your enemies that are all around, then you will then go after Amalek, finish them, and then you could move to the next step. And that's actually the same language used here with the Mikdash. When you're done with all of your enemies that are all around, and you dwell with security. Vishavtem betach means there are no enemies left. So then you can build the Mikdash. Etc. Let me summarize what we just talked about now. So this section now, just to try to remember it, right? We talked about the idea that building a throne of Hashem in the world is actually in the pshat of what Shlomo HaMelech is doing. Quite literally, he sits on the throne of Hashem, and it's not meant to go to his head, even though it's incredibly ornate, but there's deep symbolism to everything that he has built here. And in fact, each of the steps, even leading up to the seat, have their own particular meaning. And one of them, at least, is meant to strike awe and reverence for him. He doesn't just show up and go up there, but he takes his time deliberately to think about it. And it turns out that, in fact, this is the Beferish Gemara in Masechet Sanhedrin about the 3 mitzvahs that are dependent one on the other. Rashi says, there's a certain order. What's the order? I didn't put it in the order here. It's really Melech first, then comes Mechia, then comes Mikdash. I wrote it out of order. Okay, that's 3M. Now, and indeed, there are midrashim that back up this same idea. We don't really need them right now, but it does point out milchama l'Hashem b'Amalek midor dor, be a war of Hashem against Amalek from one generation to the next. That's the last verse there at the end of the story of the war against Amalek. So midor, from one generation, that's Shaul, who did not complete the task, to David, Zedor, Shel Mordechai HaTzadik. That's our story. That's now where we're starting to come down a little bit to the point of what happens in the story of Purim. And let's get to it here, where the world turns upside down. So I just gave you India and Ethiopia, Hodu and Kush, but Kush, the truth is, is not necessarily literally Ethiopia. Malkat Shva might have been from Ethiopia. That's debatable. But really, it refers essentially to the 127 provinces. Seems to be most of the known world at that time, if not all of it. And he sits down here in those days where? On his throne. Says the Medrash. Bayamim ahem kishavar melech Achashverosh al kisei malchuto amru chachamim kshemalach Achashverosh bikesh leshev al kisei Shlomo. The reason why we have to hear that he sat down on his throne is because there's some signal here about the throne. He wanted to sit on the throne of Shlomo because it does describe Vayeshev Shlomo al kisei Hashem. And the Jewish people were very much aggrieved about this. Amri so lifna kadosh baruch hu ribon shalom kisei shekatuv bo kisei Hashem yeshev alav oto rasha. The throne, the platform of power in the world, which is no more than a platform, a jumping off point to be able to teach the world about Hashem, to be that Or LaGoyim that the Navi talks about, that Navi Yeshaya talks about, now is going to somebody else. How could we have come to a point where there's one person who controls everything? Now, to this point in the Medrash, you could say, what do you mean the throne of Shlomo? That's somewhere in Jerusalem. He's in Persia. So what are you talking about? And maybe it means metaphorically, the power. But here, in this Medrash at least, Aseh l'ma'an shmecha, v'al tenavel kisei kvodecha, do it for your namesake, they say to Hashem, don't defile your glorious throne. And the Medrash itself asks, how did it end up in Medea? La'achar mitato shel Shlomo, after Shlomo died, Allah Sheshak melech Mitzrayim un v'natalo b'ktubat bito. Sheshak, the king of Egypt, came and he took it as part of the that which was owed to him because of the ketubah, the marriage contract of his daughter. Remember, the daughter of Paro marries Shlomo, as it says, and the Medrash goes on to describe it was then somehow taken later on to Persia. So before you smile and say, well, come on, they're moving it around the ancient Near East. I mean, really? So you know that downtown in Chicago, there is something called the Oriental Institute, and there are lots of artifacts and a whole hall that is dedicated to the Persian Empire. And things do get moved around, in point of fact, especially when they're made of ivory and overlaid with gold. How do they move it? Ani lo yodea. This is the Medrash. You want to take it literally? You want to understand it more metaphorically? That's up to you. The same idea comes from an earlier Medrash, much earlier Medrash, Esther Rabbah. That's the Medrash Rabbah. Here we have also Amru, Kevin Shemait Shlomo. When Shlomo died, Allah Sheshak, Melech Mitzrayim, Benatlo Mehem, he took it. Kevin Sha'ala, the Kevin Sha'ala Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king, the Hechriv at Yerushalayim, he glautola Bavel, he took it to Bavel, Umi Bavel Madai, from Bavel to Madai, Umi Madai Yavan, Umi Yavan Edom. It's been moving around. Okay? Amar Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Yossi, Ani Ra'iti Shvarav Beromi. I saw the broken down pieces of this throne in Rome. Now, by the by, those who are learning Daf Yomi know that not so long ago, beginning of Masechet Sukkah, there actually is a report of one of the Chachmei Talmud saying they went to Rome and they saw the parochet from the inside of the Second Temple. Is it impossible that it got moved around and ended up in the storehouse of Rome? I don't know. Nebuchadnezzar yashav alav, Koresh yashav alav, Achashverosh bal yashav alav, v'lenichu. He wanted to sit on it. He was not permitted. Amrulo, Amrule, Mishaeno asay koz muk retor, means the person who runs the entire world. Cosmok rector. That's what I have in the various perushim on Medrash Rabbah of the world. Ba'olam and Yoshua, you don't sit there. So you know what he did? He made his own at great cost. So kisei malchuto means he had to make his own throne because he couldn't sit on the kisei of Shlomo. He wasn't worthy. He tried, it didn't work. He couldn't sit there. Sifrei Dagadata of Esther, same thing, another version of the same Medrash that basically he went off and he brought his wise people from Egypt and he said, you know what? Make for me an exact replica of that chair. They couldn't do it. So they decided, they made another chair for his name. Therefore it says, al kisei malchuto, but not on kisei Shlomo. But the Medrash wants you to know, don't think he didn't try. Now, the deeper layer here, of course, is the Jewish people, the people of the world generally. We thought we were on a certain trajectory. We were at, to borrow the now probably hackneyed phrase, we were at the end of history. Remember that at the end of the 20th century, the end of history. Nothing else is going to happen. Nothing's going to go wrong. We've arrived. Everything's been taken. We checked all the boxes. We built the Mikdash Yerushalayim. And here's this beautiful throne. And Shlomo HaMelech is at the zenith of his power. And as we've been learning in our Shiur on Thursdays, the power was not just military and economic and political. The power was the power of the intellect, the power of ideas. Today, you would use the, I think, somewhat, again, overused expression. Shlomo HaMelech was the thought leader of the generation. And being that thought leader meant that he could insert within conversation and dialogue elements related to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But now the Jewish people see that there is, even more than the Babylonian Empire, a Persian Empire that is even more vast and even greater in its sweep. And they have no idea what's going to happen in this scenario. They don't know what's going to happen. And then to add to it, the Megillah, as we know, is very precise in its language. This is all of Tanakh. It's written up Ruach HaKodesh. In the 3rd chapter, he raised him up. He aggrandized him and he raised him up. He placed him in his chair above all of the other ministers. So that had to have been, in and of itself, before the decree, an incredibly terrible moment for the Jewish people. And of course, now the opportunity to try to turn things back. The only reference to a chair here is actually this pasuk in chapter 5. We're all familiar with it. And so it was on the 3rd day. Esther donned royalty. She stood in the courtyard of the house of the king, the inner house of the king, facing the house of the king. And the king is sitting on his throne in his royal place, facing the doorway. Right. So I may put a little out of order here, but Tzedek HaKohen at the bottom of the same page, it says, as the Zohar HaKadosh teaches us, and we have this also in Midrashim, but found it's a beautiful piece here in Reb Tzadok. He says every time it uses Hamelech Achashverosh, so it has Achashverosh's name, but it's the king Achashverosh, so that's just him. But when there's a usage of just Hamelech, especially when it's being repeated over and over again, that's the Beit Hamelech. And here we have again the Beit Hamelech, and it's what the Melech is doing, right? And he's on the Kisei Malchuto, and it's again Beveit HaMalchut. It's just over and over and over again. It's a double entendre. What I would say from Canada, double entendre. We hear two things. We hear both a reference to actually what's transpiring in a theater of the real, but also in another plane of reality, the spiritual plane, which is no less real, even if it's not physical. Esther HaMalka understands she's making her appeal to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and she adorns a higher spiritual level. That's the Gemara here, Masachet Megillah. She donned divine inspiration, love shita ruach hakodesh. She placed it upon herself, or was placed on her, more precisely. The Or HaMeir, Rav Zev Wolf Halevi of Zitomer. No more need be said, but I thought just since we're quoting Torah, this mention something. You see on the map what country it's in. So enough said. The Or HaMeir explains that the truth is the Jewish people were in a very bad way, and they really were not worthy of a miracle. And spiritually, it was a very low time for the Jewish people that brought them into this terrible near catastrophe. That's when Esther comes in. And she's really making an appeal, notwithstanding the fact that the Jewish people are not really worthy. She's not really 100% worthy either, but she's trying. She's the best they have, so to speak. As it was then, writes the Or HaMeir, at the end of the 18th century. He was a Talmud here of the Maggid of Mezerich. So too is it in every generation like that. So we should take it to heart, and we should realize that in the time that the enemy came, in the time of Achashverosh, they were really not worthy of a miracle. But in his great mercy, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave her what's called the Chut Shel Chesed, more than she deserved. The thread of kindness fell upon her. And why? Because the generation desperately needed it. And therefore, even though the throne is not just that it doesn't exist, the throne has someone else sitting on it, and his name is not Shlomo. The idea that that's the best we have, is to send in an Esther HaMalka the power of tefillah, the recognition that on one level, it does involve walking the corridors of power in a very real sense of having those conversations physically, but on a spiritual level, it's so much more. It's about the tefillah. It's about appealing to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And in fact, this imagery, this idea, the Kohen from Lublin fills out and says, that's what it means when it says that she's standing, Vatamod, that he quotes the Zohar HaKadosh, Vatamod, she stood. It says she stood in a certain place going in. Ve'en amid el tzluta, she's praying, she's davening. Nochach Beit HaMelech, she's facing the home of the king, means Nochach Beit HaMikdash, right? Because all of the Jewish people need to daven. And when we daven, it always has to be facing the Mikdash, as the halacha teaches us. If we don't know which way is Yerushalayim from wherever we are, we can't figure it out. We're mixed up, or a place where we can't figure out the cardinal points. Yechavenet libo keneged Beit Kodesh Kodashim, face inward toward the Holy of Holies. That means to have it in mind, have it in mind. And that's what's going on. That's the idea of turning things back. Now, we don't have a Beit HaMikdash. We have in our mind's eye maybe some imagery of what it might one day look like. We have it from Sefer Yechezkel. We do what we can. But I want to suggest tonight in closing that we have something else that is much more frequent than we realize. And that is something that we recite fairly frequently in shul. Many of us recite it many times a day in our congregation, and the shuls like it. It's a story from the beginning of Sechet Bracha. We don't have time to read the whole story inside. If you want to scan your eye, if you want like multitasking, you can read it for yourself, about a particular Tana named Rabbi Yossi, who went into a burnt out building in Yerushalayim, and he was davening. Eliyahu Hanavi came to speak with him, and there's a whole hitgalut Eliyahu, a discussion. Eliyahu Hanavi is speaking to him, and the idea that, again, the imagery that HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself is, so to speak, kiviyachol, in pain. Woe to the children who in their sins I had to destroy my house. I burnt my sanctuary. I exiled them to be among the nations. Eliyahu Hanavi points out that's not one time Hashem is saying that. Hashem is saying that all the time, right? Every single day. Look at the red dot here in the Hebrew. But when the Jewish people go to shul, when they go to the Beit Midrash, and they say the words, Yehei Shmei Hagadol Mivorach, may the great name of God be blessed. We say it, Yehei Shmei Rabba Mivorach, etc. HaKadosh Baruch Mananea Rosho Ve'omer Ashrei Amel Shemakal Snot Beveito. God, so to speak, nods his head and he says, happy or fortunate is the king who is praised within his own home. The shul and the Beit Midrash take that place of the Mikdash. Kach malo la'av shehiglad banav. So for the father who has exiled his children, v'oilem labanim shegalim al shulchan avihem, and woe unto the children who were cast out from the table of their parents, of their father rather. Tosfot here point out that in the Machzor Vitru, which means in Rashi's Beit Midrash, they taught something really astounding. And it goes like this. You have to look very carefully at these words and scrutinize them. Yehei Shmei Rabba, according to the Machzor Vitri, teaches Shezut Tefillah She'anu Mitpalin She'yimale Shmo, that God's name should be made complete, as it says in the pasuk, Ki Yad Al Kes Ka. There's a hand on the throne of God. Shelo Yehei Shemo Shalem V'Kiso Shalem. The name of God, the throne of God, will not be made whole until the progeny or the descendants of Amalek, the seed of Amalek, will be wiped out. Uperushon, what it means, according to Machzor Vitri, is Kach Yehei Shmei, Shem Yud Hey, Rabba. Klomar, meaning Shalom Palin, She Yehei Shmo Gadol V'Shalem Muvorach La'olam. Shalom, period. Umavarach la'olam have a tefillah acheret. And the rest of that sentence is another prayer. So, in other words, to say it differently, every time a Jew goes to shul, according to Rashi's Beit Midrash, they say, Yehei Shmei Rabbam Varach. The Shmei is really two words. Shmei is really Aramaic for the name. But Rashi taught, no, it means Shem Yud Hey. May the name of God, Yehei Shmei Rabba, may be made great again. may it again have the Yud and the Hey joined again with the two letters, the Vav and the Hey, so that there's no longer a hand upon the throne of Hashem, on the name of Hashem. And therefore, Kaddish every single time is that affirmation. Now, the Baalei Tosfot disagreed with this for reasons we don't have time to parse tonight. They did not think that that was correct. But the Emet Liakov, who is not Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, but an earlier person also from the 18th century, died in the early 19th century, he actually explains that this whole story about Rabbi Yossi, it must have been that Rabbi Yossi himself was going into a broken down place to pray, not just because literally he had to daven mincha, but because he recognized the brokenness of the Jewish people, because there was no Beit HaMikdash. And therefore, the best he could do was to daven a little bit, even in a broken way, but it was still something. And he goes on to explain that actually he thinks, Emily Yaakov explains, we don't have time for it tonight, that the Yehei Shmei Rabba Mavarach, actually, he thinks the Machzor Vitri is 100% correct. He says, whatever Tosfot say, that's when the Beit HaMikdash is standing, that you could read Yehei Shmei Rabba a different way. But according to this Gemara, it is actually referring to, may the name of Yud, Hey, be made complete, may be made whole, may be made something, again, that is magnified and sanctified. Rav Soloveitchik explained the same thing about Rashi's view. The Nira de la Machzor Vitri Iker Hakiyum de Kaddish, who emuna begeula ha'atida. According to the Machzor Vitri, again, that was from the school of Rashi. They wrote up all of his minhagim and his halachas. So the Rabbeinu Simcha Vitrur wrote it up. So he writes, he quotes from Rashi. And that's the shita of Rashi in general, that when you recite Kaddish, when I hear Kaddish, when we answer Yehei Shmei Rabba, it's expressing a faith in the redemption of the future. Interesting, by the way, the exact version I chose to copy here did not put the Yud in Shmei, but obviously for Rashi, that's pretty important. Shmei, Shin Mem should be Yud Hey over here. Va'al Ken Pirish Yehei Shem Hashem Shalom. God's name should be whole. Tosfot didn't agree. They thought it should be read a different way. The Tur brings this exact idea, does not bring it with challenge as far as I can tell. He just quotes, Yit Gadal Vit Gadash was made based on the Pasuk from Sefer Yechezkel, where the verse, Vit Gadalti, I shall be magnified, Vit Gadash, you'll be sanctified, which was spoken in the war of Gog and Magog, for those who know what it is, at the end of days, before Mashiach Tzidkenu. That's when God's name will be made great. And by Yom Ahu, on that day, Yeh Hashem Echad, Ushmo Echad. And in that day, God's name, God and his name will be one. Shmei, Rabbah, some say it's Shem Ka, Rabbah. We're davening that the name Yud Hey, which is not complete now, should be magnified and sanctified and become whole again at the time of the redemption, when we have the reckoning with Amalek, right? The name of Hashem will not be whole. Ad Shidin Kom Yimenu. Until then. Why? Ki Yad Al Keis Ka. The kisei is not whole, the throne is not whole, and the name is not whole, except after that period of time comes at the end of days. And it turns out, therefore, every Kaddish a person recites is itself that recognition and that affirmation, I should say, that we hope and pray that God's name will be made whole. The Beit Elokim, in closing, said something really astounding. He was a contemporary of the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, and the Mabit from the Ditrani family. And he made Aliyah at one point, anyway, to Tzfat. And it describes very beautifully. He says, do you want to know where the letters of Kes and Ka, where they went? There's a missing letter Aleph from Kisei, and there's a missing Vav and Hey from Yud Ke Vav Ke, Ki Yad Al Kes Ka. He says, I'll tell you where it is. He says, I'll tell you where it's hiding. It's hiding in a little pasuk. Ki bachar Hashem b'tzion, az yeh iva l'moshav lo. God has chosen Zion, iva l'moshav lo. He, so to speak, desired it as a place for habitation. It's a beautiful piece of drush to end with. It's very sweet. The Mabit basically says in the Beit Elokim that God has chosen Zion. You know where the missing Aleph is from Kisei, why it says case? You know where it's hiding? It's in Zion. Do you know where Ka, Yud, Hey? Where's the other Vav, Hey? It's in Zion. Ki Yad Al Keis Ka. Az Yeh Iva L'Moshav Lo. When Hashem will choose Zion, then Iva, he will desire to have a place where he will dwell. And that's the Aleph of Kisei that's missing, and that's the Vav and the Hey. And we think about this, just to draw a full circle, we think about the idea that when we see the map today and we see a tiny little flag on Google Earth, a tiny little flag, we should hopefully, with all of the struggles, challenges, and difficulties of our moment, the great uncertainties, the extreme sense of insecurity that every human being should feel now based on world events. We also recognize, though, that there is a notion of a kisei, of a Kadosh Baruch Hu in this world, and that there is actually, perhaps, we hope, the beginnings of the building of the foundation of that kisei again. It has fits and starts. It's by no means a blank check. There's no such thing. Shlomo Melch didn't get a blank check. David Melch didn't get a blank check. We don't get a blank check. But we do have great resources and great opportunities as well. And when we think about a hand on the throne, we think about a Kadosh Baruch Hu's commitment to stay with us, even as we have to reckon with evil in the world. Also to recognize that there is a hand that is upon a throne, but a throne that's being built back, as it were. We are, of course, far, far away from, on one level, from the Gula Hashlema V'Amitit, from the complete and final redemption. But another level, we're extremely close. We're extremely close. And the holiday of Purim reminds us that even if the rescue from the trials of the moment does not result in the Geula Hashlema, it still would be worthy of making a celebration. It would still be worthy of having Yemei Mishta V'Simcha. And we could hopefully also say that this year, in just a few days, if not sooner, we'll be zochim to have that great brach of La Yehudim Hayta Ora V'Simcha V'Sasim Vikar. It'll come for us as well. And Kain Alanu. Thank you very much for joining tonight, and look forward to seeing those who are local here in Chicago and Skokie. I hope you'll be able to join us to listen to Parshat Zachor, to hear the Torah reading on Purim, and of course to hear the Megillah with us and to celebrate what it means to be a Jew in the year 5782 and Tafshin Pei Bet. Well, even though there's danger, there's also great opportunity. Ki bachar Hashem b'Tzion, ivala moshav lo. We believe HaKadosh Baruch Hu has chosen Zion again as a place for Klal Yisrael, and we're hopeful that the second part of the pasuk, Iva l'moshav lo, will come to its fruition. B'biat Goal Tzedek, b'mher b'meinu. Amen v'amen. Thanks very much for joining tonight. Wish everyone a great night and a good Erev Shabbos.